I sat on the edge of the bed, the guest room door clicking shut behind me. The smell of roasted turkey drifted in from the dining room, but not a plate was set for me. My son's laughter rang out, blending with his wife's sharp giggle as if walls could erase a mother. "Just stay in there, Mom. It's easier this way." His words cut deeper than the lock. 73 years of family, of sacrifice, of belonging, erased with one turn of a key. And that's when I knew the next lock that turned would be mine. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The driveway was already full when Ellie pulled up to the curb, her gloved hands tightening briefly on the steering wheel. Through the frosted windows of her son's 2-story home in Edina, she saw silhouettes moving, laughing. Amber light spilled onto the snow-covered walkway. The faint, unmistakable scent of roasted turkey, heavy with sage and butter, carried through the cold. Ellie exhaled slowly and stepped out of the car, her old winter boots crunching on ice. She adjusted the collar of her coat, smoothed her short silver hair, and climbed the porch steps. Melissa opened the door before Ellie could knock, wearing an apron with an ironic "Feast Mode" slogan stretched tight across her chest. Her lipstick was immaculate. Her smile wasn't. "Oh, good. You made it," Melissa said, stepping aside just enough to let Ellie in, not touching her. Inside, the house hummed with conversation and clinking glass. Somewhere down the hall, a football game was playing too loud on a flat screen. Ellie caught the familiar sound of Jason's laugh, full, loose, carefree. The warmth from the entryway wasn't mirrored in Melissa's tone. "We set you up in the guest room. You'll want to freshen up, I'm sure. Dinner's still going." Ellie opened her mouth to ask where the kids were, but Melissa was already walking ahead, not waiting. The guest room was barely furnished, just an old pull-out sofa, a side table, and a lamp with a crooked shade. A pine-scented candle burned, faintly on the sill, more for masking odors than decoration. The bed wasn't turned down. No water bottle, no towel, just a folded throw blanket that smelled faintly of mothballs. "Hope this is okay," Melissa said, still with that brittle smile. "We've just had so much going on." Jason appeared behind her, a beer in hand. "Hey, Mom," he said quickly, without making eye contact. "Just drop your stuff and relax, okay? We'll call you when dinner's ready." Ellie stepped inside the room, frowning. "Do you want me to?" The door shut mid-sentence. Click. Ellie froze. She stepped back and turned the knob. It didn't move. She knocked once, twice, but no answer. Just the dim sounds of laughter and silverware clinking against plates beyond the door. She stood still, the silence in the room thickening like soup. A muffled burst of applause came from the living room, followed by Melissa's loud voice. "Best cranberry sauce ever, Tara. Tara." Of course, Ellie hadn't been invited to bring anything this year. She paced the small room, tugged at the doorknob again, and then sat down on the pullout, which creaked beneath her. Her eyes moved to the tiny vent near the ceiling, too high to hear through. Her breath came shorter, more visible in the cold air. They hadn't even turned up the heat in here. Time passed. She didn't know how long. No one knocked, no one texted. At some point, she dozed off, coat still on, purse clutched in her lap like she didn't trust the room. When she woke again, her back ached and her mouth was dry. It was dark outside. Then came the soft rattle of keys. The door opened. Jason peeked in, holding a paper plate with slices of turkey, a roll, and a cold scoop of stuffing. "Here," he said, avoiding her gaze again. "We didn't want to wake you." Melissa's voice echoed faintly from down the hall. "Tell her we saved her some pie." Jason set the plate down on the side table. "You're good, right?" he mumbled, already backing out. Ellie stared at him, then down at the food. No fork. Before she could speak, the door closed again. This time, it didn't click, She listened. His footsteps padded away. A flush of the downstairs toilet. The TV roared to life again. Ellie rose slowly, moved to the door, and opened it an inch. The hallway was empty now, shadows stretching long from the recessed lights above. She stepped out quietly, then turned back and stared into the room she hadn't chosen. The roll on the paper plate had gone dry and hard. The house was still cold when Ellie stepped inside, her keys jingling in the quiet as she shut the door behind her. She didn't bother turning on the lights right away. The December dusk filtered through the blinds in shades of ash and silver, casting long shadows across the living room. She set her coat over the arm of the couch, slipped off her boots with a sigh, and stood still for a moment, listening. The silence here didn't ache, not like it did at Jason's. Ellie walked into the back room, her steps soft against the wood floor, and knelt beside the old filing cabinet tucked under the window. The drawer squeaked open in protest. She flipped through folders with worn tabs and faded labels, each one a quiet record of a life built deliberately. Tax returns, Social Security statements, faded receipts from her husband's union days at the post office. Her fingers hesitated on one file, mortgage plus house docs. She pulled it out and laid it flat on the table. The first page was yellowed, but crisp. Her name, Eleanor L. Grant, typed in neat black font, stared back at her. Below it, next to co-owner Robert D. Grant, deceased. Ellie blinked hard, ran her fingertips over the raised notary seal like a braille reminder of what was hers. The mortgage had been paid off 16 years ago. She remembered the day the final check cleared. Robert had brought home a grocery store, cake, and stuck a toothpick flag on top that said, "Ours." Jason's name wasn't anywhere, not even in the margins. She flipped through page after page, closing documents, tax assessments, utility records still in her name. Her breath came steadier now, quieter, like the air itself was recognizing something long ignored. She hadn't given him the house. He was living here because she let him. She'd only moved out after her knee surgery. He'd insisted on it at the time, saying it would be easier if she had fewer stairs. She hadn't questioned it until now. A knock at the back door startled her. She stood up slowly, peeking out through the curtain. Dot Pearson's cropped gray curls and heavy cable-knit scarf bobbed just beyond the glass, her mittened hand already mid-wave. Ellie opened the door. The scent of cold air and menthol balm followed Dot inside. "Sorry for the pop-in," Dot said. "Saw your porch light off and got worried. Thought maybe you were still over there." Ellie gestured toward the table. "I was just checking something." Dot leaned over the papers, squinting. "Is that your deed?" Ellie nodded once. "Still in my name, every inch of it." Dot whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." Ellie smoothed a page with the palm of her hand. "Jason never even asked me to sign it over. Not once." "They act like they own the place," Dot muttered, peering closer. "Melissa struts up and down that sidewalk like she built it herself." Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line. They didn't build anything. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The heater kicked on in the wall behind them, groaning like an old man waking up. Dot tapped one of the pages. "You should frame this right. Next to the front door." Ellie almost laughed. Instead, she folded the deed carefully back into its folder and stood straighter. There was a new weight in her spine. Not burden, but something bracing, something earned. "I let them treat me like a guest," she said softly. "But I was never one." Dot's eyebrows rose. "Damn right you weren't." Ellie slid the folder back into the drawer. This time the squeak didn't bother her. It sounded like a gear turning, something mechanical and necessary, something that couldn't be undone. She closed the drawer, locked it, and pocketed the key. The air inside the diner smelled of scorched coffee grounds, fried potatoes, and something faintly metallic, like old coins and wet jackets. Ellie sat in a corner booth across from Dot, whose scarf was still damp from the snow. A cracked vinyl menu lay forgotten between them, smudged with syrup fingerprints and crinkled at the edges. Ellie stirred her coffee slowly, watching the cream swirl into clouds. She hadn't said much since sitting down. The warmth of the diner hadn't yet seeped into her bones, and her thoughts were louder than the quiet hum of the place. Dot studied her for a long moment before finally speaking. "You've looked better." Ellie didn't flinch. She wrapped both hands around the mug and said, "They locked me in the guest room." Dot blinked, taken aback. "What do you mean, locked the door?" Ellie said, keeping her voice low. "Jason closed it from the outside. There was a click. I sat in there for hours. They didn't come back until it was over." Dot sat up straighter, her shoulders pulling back as though she'd been slapped. "Jesus, Ellie." Ellie looked past her toward the window, where snow was starting to drift sideways, gentle and directionless. "They brought me a paper plate with cold turkey and a dry roll. Jason didn't even look me in the eye." For a few seconds, Dot didn't say anything. Her hands rested on the table, fingers curled loosely around her coffee cup, knuckles pale. "I hope you threw it in their faces." "No," Ellie said quietly. "I opened the door and left." Dot exhaled sharply and leaned forward, her voice now carrying a steel edge. "They think you're weak. They always have. But you're not." Ellie reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad, the kind you buy at gas stations with a spiral top and flimsy cardboard backing. She flipped past grocery lists and appointment reminders until she found a blank page. Without another word, she picked up her pen and began writing. Dot tilted her head. "What are you doing?" "Making calls," Ellie said. "I'm going to change the locks, secure the doors, make sure the house is no longer open to people who treat me like I'm just in their way." Dot's expression shifted slowly from confusion to something resembling admiration. "Now that's more like it." Ellie nodded, eyes still on the paper. "This isn't just about a door. It's about everything they've taken for granted." Dot took a sip of her coffee, then leaned back in the booth. "You know a guy?" Ellie scribbled down a second number and circled it twice. "I'll find one." A plate of eggs slid onto the table, set there by a waitress with dark circles under her, eyes and a name tag that read, Brenda. Neither Ellie nor Dot touched the food. The world outside the booth felt far away. Ellie's phone buzzed softly beside her notepad. She didn't pick it up right away, but the preview lit up the screen. "Jason, don't forget Christmas dinner. Bring your pecan pie this time. Mel's mom can't stand store-bought." Dot saw it too. Her mouth twisted into something between a laugh and a sneer. "He really thinks he can just text you like nothing happened." Ellie locked the phone without responding and slid it into her bag. They're already planning the next performance. Smiles, small talk, and another seat at the table. Dot rested her elbows on the table, staring across at her friend. "You've got something better now." Ellie tapped the notepad with her pen, then underlined the last number she'd written. "I have the truth. I have the deed, and I'm going to have new locks." The wind outside howled briefly as the diner door opened, letting in a swirl of snow and a young couple in damp coats. The door swung shut again, muting the cold, but Ellie didn't turn to look. Her eyes stayed fixed on the page. The cold had sharpened, overnight, turning the air into something almost metallic, like breathing through foil. Ellie stood by the front window, mug in hand, watching the snow sift down in lazy spirals over Lake Nkamis. Her duplex looked the same from the outside, quiet, unassuming, but something fundamental had changed inside her. The doorbell rang just once, not impatient, not loud, just certain. Ellie set her mug down, pulled the curtain aside to check, and then opened the door. The man on her porch was tall, with a lined face and a gray beard that looked like it had once been red. He wore a thick navy jacket zipped to the throat and a canvas tool bag slung over one shoulder. A patch on his chest read, "Lawson's Lock and Key." "You're Eleanor?" he asked, voice gravelly but kind. Ellie, she said, stepping back. Come on in. Mr. Lawson. Rick, he corrected gently, wiping his boots before stepping inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, he scanned the house with a practiced glance. Not nosy, not judging, just a craftsman getting a feel for the job ahead. You said rekeying, he began. But are we talking full replacement? Deadbolts too? Ellie folded her arms, suddenly conscious of the thinness of the old front door. All of it, she said. Every lock, every entrance. Rick nodded slowly, as though her answer confirmed something he'd already suspected. We'll start with the front and work our way around. She followed him to the door, watching as he unpacked a quiet toolkit. Screwdrivers worn smooth from years of use, a lock cylinder extractor, brass plates, fresh screws. Each motion was deliberate, almost meditative. I inherited this business from my uncle, he said, more to the silence than to her. Started sweeping floors in his shop when I was 16. Back then it was all pins and tumblers. These days, everyone wants digital. I still like metal. You can hear when it's right. Ellie listened, letting the clink of metal and turn of tools settle. Into the rhythm of the room, there was something grounding in it, honest. What made you call me? He asked gently, not looking up from the deadbolt he was removing. She hesitated, then said, My son thinks this is still his house. Rick paused, not dramatically, just long enough to give her the space to go on. He moved in years ago. I moved out after my surgery, and I never went back. Now he treats it like I was just visiting. Rick didn't comment. He just kept working, nodding as though he'd heard versions of this before. Different names, different families, same quiet eraser. When so? He finished the front door. He gestured for her to lead the way. They moved through the house together, room by room, door by door, the side entrance, the garage, even the rusting cellar door that hadn't been opened in years. By the time they looped back to the kitchen, his hands smelled faintly of machine, oil and cold brass. He opened a small lockbox and pulled out a clean keyring. 6 keys, he said, handing them to her one by one. Identical cut. You keep them. You decide who gets a copy, if anyone. Ellie held the ring in her palm. The keys were small and unassuming, but their weight was undeniable. They clicked faintly, against each other, a delicate sound with unexpected force behind it. Thank you, she said, her voice lower than before. Steadier. This means more than I can explain. Rick gave a slight nod. Doesn't need explaining. He began packing up his tools while Ellie walked slowly to the front door. She turned the deadbolt once, then again. The sound was soft, but final, like a judge's gavel in miniature. She didn't flinch. Rick zipped up his coat and paused by the threshold. If you ever want cameras installed, I know a guy who doesn't charge too much. I'll think about it, Ellie said, then added, but I think I'm fine for now. He gave her a small smile, then stepped out into the early dusk. The door shut behind him with a deep, certain thud. The sky had turned a bruised gray by mid-afternoon, the kind of dull winter light that blurred hours together. Ellie sat near the front window in her armchair, a book open, but unread on her lap. The heat from the vent hummed steadily, warming the soles of her slippers. One of her new brass keys lay beside her on the windowsill, catching bits of light like a private promise. She was about to rise and start on a pot of soup when the knock came. No, not a knock, a bang. It rattled the door. Then came another. The second was louder, sharper, followed by Jason's voice, raised and breathless. Mom, open up. I need to get inside. Ellie didn't flinch. She stood calmly, smoothing her cardigan with practiced grace, and moved toward the door. She didn't rush. Instead, she unlatched the deadbolt, slid the security chain into place, and opened the door exactly 2 inches. Jason stood on the front step in his navy peacoat, fists clenched at his sides, cheeks flushed red, not from the cold, but from anger. Behind him, Melissa hovered with crossed arms and narrowed eyes, her hair tucked into a tight ponytail under a fur-lined hood. Her mouth was already open. "You changed the locks?" Jason barked. Ellie's voice was calm, almost polite. "Yes, you didn't tell us." "I didn't need to." Jason leaned closer, pressing a hand to the edge of the door frame. "We left a folder inside with tax stuff, important documents. We just need to get them real. Quick!" Melissa stepped up behind him, her voice slicing through the chill. "This is ridiculous. We need to check something inside. Just let us in." Ellie didn't move. Her eyes were steady, chin lifted just slightly. "This is my home," she said quietly. "You'll check nothing." There was a silence, cold, solid, and stretching. From across the street, a front porch light flicked on. Dot stood under her awning in a heavy parka and thick-knit hat holding a steaming mug. She didn't wave, didn't speak, just sipped and watched. Jason followed Ellie's gaze and saw her. "Oh, great," he muttered, rolling his eyes. Melissa didn't. "Bother pretending anymore. You think this makes you look strong? You're being spiteful. We told everyone this place was ours." The sentence dropped like a rock on wet cement. Ellie's fingers gripped the door slightly tighter, but she said nothing. Jason's head whipped toward Melissa. "Jesus, Mel!" She turned, on him. "Well, it's true. What does it matter now? Everyone thinks we own it. Our name's on all the holiday cards, Jason." Ellie felt her pulse slow, not quicken. The silence on her end wasn't confusion. It was calculation, measured, precise. She didn't look at Jason. She didn't glare at Melissa. She simply closed the door until the chain went taut, then leaned forward just enough for her voice to carry. "You'll need to tell everyone something new then." The door clicked shut before they could answer. Outside, Jason shouted something. His voice muffled now, less sure, more hollow. Melissa stomped once, hard enough to scatter snow from the porch steps. Neither of them rang the bell again. From her window, Ellie watched them stalk back to the car. Jason fumbled with the door, then slammed it. Melissa said something sharply as she got in, but Ellie couldn't hear it. She didn't need to. Across the street, Dot raised her mug in salute. The next morning, Ellie awoke before the sun. Snow still clung to the edges of the window panes, glowing faintly in the blue light of dawn. The house was quiet in the way only a secure house could be, still calm, sealed from intrusion. She brewed her coffee slowly, savoring the aroma as it filled the kitchen. When it finished, she poured it into her favorite stoneware mug, the one with a tiny chip at the rim from years ago, and stood at the sink, looking out at the street as the city began to stretch awake. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't reach for it right away, let it buzz again. A minute later, it buzzed again. 3 calls, one after the other, each one tagged with Jason Mobile. Ellie picked up the phone only to swipe the first voicemail. Notification away, then the second, then the third. She didn't open them. Didn't need to. She slid the phone into the drawer beside the sink and closed it. By 9, the air had warmed just enough to melt a bit of the snow, leaving patches of wet brick and glistening sidewalk. Ellie was pulling on her coat when there was a knock, gentler this time. 2 rhythmic taps followed by the creak of a familiar voice outside. "It's Dot. Don't shoot." Ellie smiled despite herself and opened the door. Dot wore a long black coat with a patterned scarf tucked snugly at the collar. She held up a canvas tote bag like a badge. "I'm going to the farmer's market. You coming or—" "What?" Ellie hesitated. It had been a long time since she'd gone out without feeling like she had to be somewhere for someone else. Groceries had become errands, not outings. But Dot was already halfway down the steps, not waiting for a yes. So Ellie grabbed her gloves and went. The market near Minnehaha Creek was quiet, not yet crowded. Rows of white tents stood like a patchwork, quilt against the pale winter sky, each one filled with the warm smells of bread, roasted nuts, and cinnamon. Children bundled in puffer jackets clutched cocoa cups while their parents haggled over kale and honey jars. Ellie moved slowly through the stalls, breathing in the wood smoke from a nearby fire pit, her cheeks pink from the cold. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, her mind wasn't looping on what had been taken. It lingered instead on what remained. At one stall, a man in a heavy flannel coat handed her a paper-wrapped loaf of sourdough. She thanked him, tucking it carefully into her bag. Dot walked beside her, sipping a hot cider, looking far too pleased with herself. "You're glowing," she said. "I knew you just needed to get out." Ellie looked down at her boots, crunching softly through packed snow. "Feels good, carrying my own things, choosing them." Dot elbowed her lightly. "Almost like you own the place." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind between women who've earned it. Later that afternoon, Ellie was back home unpacking the bread and a small jar of apple butter when her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text, not a call. "Jason, I've called you 5 times. We need to talk about what you did. It's not okay. I'll stop by soon." The words sat on the screen, flimsy and entitled. Ellie read them once, then deleted the thread entirely. Just then, another buzz. But this time, the name on the screen brought no weight, just a small lift of her brow. "Rick Lawson," she picked up. "Hey, Ellie, just checking in. Thought of a few more security tweaks. Camera above the door, floodlights out back. No pressure, of course." Ellie smiled into the phone, leaning against the counter. "That's kind of you, Rick, but I think I'm okay." "You sure?" "Yes," she said. "For the first time in a long while, I feel safe." Rick didn't push. "Glad to hear it. You know where to find me?" She hung up, then pulled the bread from the paper and set it on the cutting board. The crust cracked under the knife with a satisfying crunch. She spread a thin layer of butter, and as she sat down to eat, her hands were steady. Her appetite had returned. Ellie stood in the living room, wiping the last crumbs of toast from her plate, when a ping echoed from the phone she had left charging by the window. She hadn't expected another text from Jason so soon, not after yesterday's silence, but this wasn't a message. It was a notification. She tapped the screen, a social media tag. Jason had posted a photo. It was a wide shot of her front porch taken on a sunnier day, the red door, the white trim, the potted mums she'd arranged in the fall. All of it unmistakably hers. Above the image, his caption read, "Our forever home, finally settled. Couldn't have done it without Mel. Count grateful. A family first." The comment section was already growing. "Aunt Denise, beautiful. So glad. It's yours now." Mark from Jason's office, "Congrats, man. That's a huge step." Tina M., love the porch. Invite me over when it's warm. Melissa's cousin Rachel, so proud of you 2 homeowners. Ellie set the phone down with surgical precision, then picked it back up, this time opening the camera app. She took her own photo of the house from inside, looking out through the narrow window beside the door. The brass key glinted on the table, behind her in the reflection. Then she tucked the phone away and went to retrieve her coat. By midday, she was stepping through the tall glass doors of the Hennepin County Records Office. The air inside smelled of printer toner and floor polish. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Ellie crossed the tiled floor at an even pace, her handbag swinging lightly at her side. The clerk behind the main counter looked up and smiled. "Ellie," she said warmly, "it's been a while." "Hi, Carla," Ellie said, her voice measured but kind. "I need a property ownership confirmation certified address." Ellie slid a small note card across the counter. Carla barely glanced at it before nodding. "Of course, just a second." She disappeared into the back room, heels clicking smartly on the floor, and Ellie rested her hands on the countertop. She felt no rush, no flutter in her chest. If anything, there was something deeply satisfying about standing here in a building governed by facts and proof. A few minutes later, Carla returned holding a crisp manila folder and a document with An official-looking seal. "All clean," she said, smiling. "It's still in your name. Has been since you and Robert bought it. No liens, no joint claims, no ownership transfers. You're the only one on record." Ellie looked down at the paper, and her eyes softened for just a moment at the sight of her late husband's name beside hers. Robert D. Grant, deceased, still honored in print. "Can you stamp it certified?" she asked. "Already did," Carla said, flipping the bottom corner to reveal the raised blue seal. "And I printed 2 copies just in case." Ellie chuckled under her breath. "You always were 3 steps ahead." Carla leaned closer, dropping her voice. "If you want to file a public ownership notice just to get ahead of any false claims, I can help with that too." Quietly. "I might," Ellie said, tucking the papers into her purse with practiced care. "I'll let you know." Carla gave her hand a gentle squeeze over the counter. "Good for you, Ellie." Back home, Dot was sitting on the front porch wrapped in a crocheted shawl, sipping from a travel mug. When Ellie held up the folder, she let out a delighted gasp. "You did it." Ellie walked up the steps and handed her one of the copies. "Black and white, signed, certified, and completely mine." Dot clapped her hands together loud enough to startle a squirrel from the neighbor's tree. "Let's get this framed." Ellie smiled. "Let's get it safe." They both laughed, but the mood was different now, lighter. Sure, Ellie had traded silence for something solid, and it had nothing to do with Jason's approval. It was the kind of letter that might have gone unnoticed, tucked between a grocery store coupon flyer and a holiday catalog, the envelope marked Wells Fargo Home Lending Division in plain black font. Ellie was sorting through her mail at the kitchen counter when the return address caught her eye. She almost threw it out. She hadn't held a mortgage in over 15 years, but something about the weight of the envelope, the faint indentation of the document inside, gave her pause. She tore it open with her thumb. Inside was a notice of preliminary collateral review, addressed not to her, but to Jason Grant. The house address listed was hers. Her lips tightened slightly as she scanned the bolded summary. "This communication confirms the intent to evaluate property listed at 4307 Larch Avenue for secured financing pending documentation. A legal claim to ownership is required for further processing." Ellie stared at the page for several long seconds before folding it crisply in half. She placed it on the table beside her coffee cup, then walked unhurried to the drawer where she kept the certified copies Carla had printed just days earlier. She slipped one copy into a protective sleeve. No shaking hands, no hurried breaths, just methodical calm, like tightening a seatbelt before a long curve. The branch office sat just off Hennepin and 46th, tucked beside a pharmacy and a dry cleaner. Ellie stepped through the glass doors a little before noon. The carpet smelled faintly of cologne and paper dust. A cheerful woman at the reception desk greeted her with a practiced smile. "Hi there. Do you have an appointment?" Ellie returned the smile, brief but cordial. "I think someone will want to see this." She held up the sleeve containing the certified deed. Within minutes, she was seated, across from a young man in a tailored blazer, his nameplate reading Michael Landis, Senior Lending Advisor. He adjusted his tie as she placed the document squarely in front of him. "I received a letter addressed to my son regarding a loan application using this property as collateral," she said evenly. "This is my house. I have never given him legal claim. I'd like that on record today." Michael glanced down at the seal, flipping to the back for confirmation. His brow furrowed, and he cleared his throat. "Well," he said, already typing something into his computer, "this certainly clears things up." He picked up the sleeve again, reading the document more carefully now, the weight of his voice shifting. "This is more than enough to stop the application from moving forward. I apologize for the confusion, Miss Grant." "There is no confusion," Ellie replied. "There's just entitlement." Michael swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. I'll flag this immediately and close the file." She nodded once, then stood. He moved with her, extending a hand that was warmer than it had been when she first walked in. "Thank you for bringing this in. Honestly, we see a lot of people try to fudge ownership, but rarely does someone walk in with the proof already stamped." "I keep my receipts," Ellie said, the corner of her mouth tilting just slightly. Back home, Ellie sat in her armchair by the window, the certified copy now returned to its drawer, the lid locked once more. A soft snow had begun to fall again, flakes catching on the edges of the porch light. The world felt hushed. Her phone buzzed again. This time she let it ring. Jason Mobile. She didn't answer. She didn't send it to voicemail either. She just let it ring, slow, steady, inconsequential. When it stopped, she muted the phone and turned her attention to the crossword open on the coffee table. 14 down. Something you earn but can't be gifted. She smiled, then slowly penciled in the letters RESPECT. It was just after 3 when Ellie heard the knock. Not pounding this time, measured, deliberate, but it was the kind of knock meant to imply importance, urgency, entitlement disguised as civility. She didn't hurry to answer. She finished drying her hands, hung the towel neatly on the hook beside the sink, and walked to the front door with the same quiet calm she'd worn like armor all week. Jason stood on the porch, coat unzipped, jaw tight. Melissa was beside him, arms folded, her posture sharp enough to cut glass. A scowl pulled at her mouth as though it had been resting there for years. Ellie didn't invite them in. She opened the door just wide enough for her voice to be heard and said, "If you're here to ask for food, you're late. If you're here for anything else, say it." Jason forced a tight smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "We need to talk inside." "No, you don't." His smile dropped. "Fine, then we'll talk here." He held up a manila folder, thinner than Ellie expected. "I talked to a lawyer," he said. "This situation isn't as cut and dry as you think. If we both agreed to a title transfer, it can still move quickly. You wouldn't have to deal with any more paperwork." "Or any more ownership?" Ellie asked softly. "Any more independence?" Jason flushed. "You don't need to live here alone. That's not safe." Melissa cut in, her tone coated in pity and poison. "You're too old to keep this place up, Ellie. What are you going to do when you fall or get confused? This house is a burden for everyone." Ellie didn't blink. "And you were going to lighten the load by pretending it was already yours?" Jason shifted uncomfortably. "It doesn't have to be a fight." "Then stop showing up like it's one." She stepped back from the doorway for a moment, leaving them framed by the snow-dusted porch. When she returned, she was holding the certified deed Carla had printed, the gold seal still crisp in the corner. She laid it gently on the small wooden table by the entrance, right in their view. "I don't need to explain this again, not to either of you." Jason stared at it. Melissa's mouth opened like she had a retort ready, but nothing came out. A gust of wind swirled past the porch, rustling the bushes near the steps. Across the street, Dot leaned against her porch post, arms folded, wearing a sweatshirt that read, "Not today, Satan," and sipping from a thermos. She didn't wave this time, just watched. "You're making this hard," Jason said finally, voice smaller than before. Ellie looked at him long and level. "I raised you in this house. I gave you a place to sleep, to eat, to grow. I opened every door. For you, but I'm not giving you the key to this one." She moved to shut the door. Melissa stepped forward like she might wedge her foot into the frame. Ellie didn't flinch. "Try it," she said. Melissa froze. The door closed firmly, not slammed, not locked in haste, just closed with finality. Inside, Ellie took a long breath, her hands as still as stone. She walked to the table, picked up the Yafur deed, and tucked it away without ceremony. Outside, Jason's voice rose once, cracked, then dropped again into silence. Ellie didn't check the window. She didn't need to. The call with Rick had ended minutes ago, but Ellie hadn't moved from where. She stood, hands still resting lightly on the phone. His voice, normally so even, had held something beneath it this time. Concern, maybe, or just disappointment in people who should know better. She stared at the front door for a long moment, not because she was afraid of what might happen next, but because she wasn't. Not anymore. By noon, Rick was back at the duplex. Snow clung to the bottoms of his work pants, and his breath fogged the air between them as he stepped inside. No paperwork, no preamble. He carried a slim black duffel and a long steel box under one arm. Security bar, he said simply, the kind they use in commercial spaces, discreet but solid. Ellie nodded. Install it. Rick didn't talk much as he worked. He moved with quiet purpose, kneeling at the base of the interior doorframe, marking drill points, tightening bolts. Ellie sat nearby, watching without hovering, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of chamomile. He glanced over his shoulder once. "It's not paranoia," he said. "It's prevention." She smiled faintly. "Feels more like preparation." He finished within an hour. The bar was sleek and matte black, hidden cleanly beneath the door's inner frame. To the casual eye, it was nothing, but Ellie had seen the thickness of the steel rod. She knew what it could withstand. When he was done, Rick stood, wiped his hands, and said, "You're good now. I wouldn't worry." "I'm not," she said, "but thank you for letting me know." He nodded. People like that. When you take away the thing they thought they already owned, they don't always leave quiet. As he left, Ellie locked the door behind him, engaged the deadbolt, and slid the security bar into place for the first time. The sound of it settling into its brackets was soft, but final. That night, Dot showed up in her pajamas and a quilted robe, holding a pillow under one arm and a bag of peanut butter crackers under the other. "You're not going to argue with me," she said before Ellie could even greet her. "If they were bold enough to ask a locksmith to open your house, they might be bold enough to try something worse. And you know how fast cops move for old women? They don't." Ellie opened the door wide and stepped aside. "You bringing the entire pantry?" Dot dropped the crackers on the kitchen counter. "Just the essentials." They set up camp in the living room. Ellie on the recliner, Dot stretched out on the couch under two mismatched blankets. The TV played a rerun of Columbo, the kind of slow mystery where no one rushed and everything unraveled eventually. Neither of them talked much. They didn't have to. At 11:43 p.m., the headlights came. They swept slowly across the wall like a lighthouse beam, slicing through the slats of the blinds. The hum of an engine idled just long enough to be noticed. Ellie didn't move. She sat up straighter and peeked out from behind the curtain, her breath fogging the glass for just a second. Jason's SUV. It cruised down the block once, then circled back, slower this time. Dot didn't ask. She simply muttered, "Told you." The car didn't stop. It didn't even pull to the curb. After one more loop, it coasted around the corner and disappeared. Ellie waited a beat longer before releasing the curtain. "You okay?" Dot asked from the couch. Ellie turned off the lamp. "I'm fine." And she was. There was nothing hollow or performative in her voice, no flicker of fear, no second guessing. Her hands didn't tremble, her pulse didn't spike. If anything, she felt more certain now than before. The locks had held, the walls had stood, and the line had been drawn clearly, unshakably. The envelope Jason left sat unopened for nearly 2 days. Ellie placed it beside the fruit bowl on the kitchen counter and left it there unread. It didn't hum with urgency. It didn't threaten. It merely existed. Just another attempt to assert control dressed up as concern. But by the 3rd day, the calls began. They weren't from Jason. They were from family. The first came from her niece Megan in Duluth, then from her cousin June in Missouri, then an old friend of Robert's who still sent her birthday cards from Nevada. Each voice was a variation of the same soft tone. "Ellie, honey," Jason called, said, "You were having some trouble." He told us you've been acting strange. Said you might be forgetting things. Look, we're not trying to meddle. We just want to help." Ellie didn't interrupt. She let them speak. Then she calmly invited them over. On Saturday afternoon, 3 cars parked neatly in front of Ellie's duplex. The sky was clear and cold, the air still sharp with February. Megan stepped out first, wrapping a scarf around her neck as she took in the house like it might be haunted. Inside, Ellie had laid out fresh scones and coffee on the dining table. No apology, no over-explaining, just warmth and space and a truth she didn't need to dress up. Dot was already there, sitting off to the side like a silent witness in a courtroom, her knitting in her lap, her eyes sharp behind tortoise-shell glasses. Ellie greeted them each with a hug, calm and steady. "I'm glad you came," she said. June, Jason's second cousin on Robert's side, clasped her hands together tightly. "Ellie, we just want to understand this tension. It's not like you." "No," Ellie said, pouring coffee. "But it is like Jason." Megan's brow furrowed. "He said you changed the locks, that you're paranoid, that you've been ignoring him." "I have," Ellie said plainly. "On purpose." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't retreat into defense. Instead, she walked to the sideboard, opened a small drawer, and pulled out 2 things. First, the certified deed, stamped, dated, her name and Robert's, no one else's. Then, a printed copy of the note Melissa had scribbled and left tucked in her mailbox weeks ago before Thanksgiving. It read, "Please don't confuse hospitality with ownership. You were always a guest, Ellie. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." She handed both papers to June, who read them in silence. The room felt smaller, heavier. When she passed them to Megan, the younger woman looked up, startled. "He said this was their house." Ellie nodded once. "He also tried to use it for a bank loan without asking, and then told you all I was confused." June leaned back in her chair, her lips pressed into a line. "He made it sound like you were slipping." Ellie looked her directly in the eyes. "He wanted me out so he could claim what he never earned." For a long moment, no one spoke. Dot set down her knitting and leaned forward. "You know," she said, "some trees just grow bad fruit and some apples don't fall far. They just rot where they land." The tension cracked slightly. Megan let out a small breath that could have almost been a laugh. Even June gave a soft snort into her coffee. Ellie smiled, but there was no smugness in it, just relief. They wanted the story to sound simple. She said that I was slipping, that they were stepping in, but the truth's never simple, and it's never quiet. She folded the deed back into its folder and returned it to the drawer. "They'll be louder before they stop," she added, almost to herself. The county office building. Downtown wasn't beautiful, but Ellie had never cared for beauty in city structures. She appreciated design that lasted, concrete that didn't apologize for being heavy, doors that didn't creak when opened, a lobby where every footstep echoed with purpose. She stepped into the atrium shortly after 10, coats still dusted with flurries, and a sealed folder tucked under her arm. Her boots squeaked against the marble floor, and for a moment she was struck by how clean everything smelled. Not sterile, just intentional. Paper and lemon polish and a trace of warm air from a vent overhead. Carla met her near the records counter, a cardigan draped over her shoulders and a legal pad in one hand. "Ellie," she said with a smile, walking around the partition, "I had a feeling I'd see you again soon." "I got another notice," Ellie replied. "This time not from Jason." Carla's smile dimmed just enough to show she understood. She gestured toward a back table. "Let's sit." They went through the paperwork slowly, Carla explaining each section without rushing, Ellie nodding along, reading every line. Together, they prepared a protective ownership affidavit, a filing that would legally flag any unauthorized attempt to transfer, leverage, or otherwise claim interest in the property. "Once this is stamped," Carla said, holding the final document between her palms, "nothing can move forward. Sale, refinance, name change without the system flagging it. Not just county-wide, statewide. Perfect, Ellie said. Carla smiled, flipped the document, and pressed the embossed seal into the bottom corner. The metal stamp clicked down hard and clean. It sounded to Ellie like the click of her own front door lock. "You're airtight now," Carla said, passing the page across the table. Ellie stared at the raised seal for a moment, running her thumb gently over its ridges. She hadn't expected it to make her emotional, but something about holding the final say in her hands made her feel not triumphant, but anchored, like she'd returned to the ground after months of floating in someone else's narrative. Outside, Dot was waiting in her car near the curb, her scarf wrapped high enough to cover half her face. She rolled down the window as Ellie approached. "Well?" Ellie held up the paper, folded neatly in thirds. Dot grinned. "You're a brick wall with a heartbeat. Get in. I'm taking you to lunch." They ended up at a quiet cafe a few blocks from the courthouse, one of those old Minneapolis staples with scuffed wood floors, worn booths, and soup that always came with a slice of buttered rye. The place smelled of dill and onions and radiator. Heat and Dot ordered them both the winter special without asking. Ellie didn't argue. As they ate, Dot recounted a ridiculous story about her cousin's third husband trying to fake a heart attack during a yard sale disagreement. And Ellie laughed, so hard she had to wipe her eyes. It felt earned. She didn't mention Jason once, and neither did Dot. Not until they were walking back to the car, coats zipped tight, steam rising from their breath in small puffs. "I think you're free of it," Dot said as they buckled in. "Of all that twisting like they don't get to name it anymore," Ellie nodded. "I feel it." Back on her street, the snow had picked up again, thicker now, clinging to windshields and muffling sound. Dot pulled up to the curb, and as Ellie reached for the handle, she froze. Jason's SUV was idling halfway down the block. He didn't pull up, didn't roll down the window, just sat there, engine humming like a question. Dot noticed too. "You want me to hang around?" "No," Ellie said. "Let him see me come home happy." She stepped out of the car, walked to her front door without looking back, and unlocked it in one smooth motion. No hesitation. Inside, she stood just behind the curtain and waited. Jason didn't approach. After a minute, he pulled away. Tires, crunching slowly over fresh snow. No horn, no wave, just distance. Ellie had always thought estate planning was for people who owned sailboats, men with second wives, women with trust funds and brittle smiles. She never pictured herself in the Gao's polished offices of Wilkins and Rowe, sitting across from a walnut desk while a paralegal brought coffee in real china. But here she was. The office smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, the walls lined with framed degrees and black and white photographs of stern men shaking hands. The room was too warm, but the pen in Ellie's hand was heavy and gold, and when she signed her name, it didn't tremble. Thomas Rowe, her late husband's old friend and longtime attorney, looked up from the folder with a soft smile. "That's it," he said. "Final page." Ellie exhaled, but not out of relief, out of certainty. "I made it clear," she asked. "You did?" He tapped the file. "You've named the Nokomi's Animal Sanctuary as primary beneficiary. You've set aside small bequests to 3 neighbors. Dot's is more than generous, and his eyes flicked briefly to the paper. Jason has been removed entirely. No residuals, no fallback." "Good," Ellie said. "He's already taken enough." She turned to Dot, who sat quietly on the nearby sofa, a Kleenex pressed under one eye. "You crying over me or the rescue dogs?" Dot sniffled and waved her off. "Shut up." "Both." Thomas chuckled. "You'd be surprised how few people do this part, the cleanup. Most just assume their messes will sort themselves after they're gone." Ellie met his eyes. "That's exactly why I'm doing it now. I've lived long enough with someone else's mess. I'm not handing mine to anybody." He gave a quiet, respectful nod, then stood to witness the final notarization. When it was done, Ellie tucked her copy into her purse. Not the outer pocket where Jason once slipped birthday cards, but deep in the center, beside her keys, lipstick, and small folding knife. The air outside was colder than earlier, the wind off the lake sharp enough to sting. Dot pulled her coat tight around her and walked beside Ellie in silence for a block before breaking it. "What made you pick the animal place?" she asked, not unkindly. Ellie smiled at the sidewalk. "Because animals don't ask for more than they need. They don't lie to your face while looking for what's behind you, and they don't take the house and call it theirs." Dot reached out and gently squeezed her arm. "You could have picked a church or some scholarship, but you picked creatures with soft ears and no inheritance clause. You're a better woman than I am." "No," Ellie said. "Just a woman done waiting for others to be better." That night, after a hot bath and half a glass of red wine, Ellie opened her laptop and made a modest online donation to the sanctuary. $1,000 as a start. Nothing flashy, nothing with fanfare, just a gesture that felt exactly right. 2 days later, a handwritten thank you card arrived in the mail. Inside was a photo. A pale brown puppy with oversized paws and folded ears looked up from a flannel blanket with sleepy, uncertain eyes. A sticky note was attached. "Meet Ellie. She came in yesterday, abandoned behind a grocery store. Safe now, named after someone kind." Ellie sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading it, not crying, just quiet. She folded the note neatly and slipped it into the drawer beside the deed. That Friday, just after lunch, the landline rang. Ellie answered, expecting a robocall or a follow-up from the vet about her neighbor's cat. Instead, "Ellie, it's Carla." Ellie straightened. "Everything okay?" Carla's voice had a cautious rhythm to it, careful and deliberate. "I thought you'd want to know. Jason and Melissa's mail forwarding just bounced back to our office, marked invalid. No forwarding address. They haven't left the county, not officially." Ellie felt her spine stiffen. "So, where are they?" Carla lowered her voice. "They're using a defunct P.O. box, but I ran some informal checks. Property records flagged Melissa's name attached to a rental application 3 blocks from your old neighborhood. It's not in her name. Not legally, but Ellie, they haven't moved out. They're squatting somewhere else." Ellie stared out the window. Not gone, just hiding. "I thought you should know," Carla said. Ellie's hand gripped the phone just a little tighter. "Thank you. I'm glad I filed when I did." "Me too," Carla said. "You're one step ahead as always." When the line clicked off, Ellie didn't speak. She stood there in the kitchen, calm but burning, not with fear but with awareness. They weren't finished, but neither was she. It began with Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down mentioning it at the co-op. "Did you hear? Melissa and Jason evicted, owe 6 months back rent, left the place trashed." Then from Dot's hairdresser's niece, who worked at a title agency part-time, they tried to co-sign on a lease, failed the credit check twice. And finally, from a man Dot only referred to as Gary, who knows everything. They're living above a vape shop in an old converted office. No working heat, just one of those plug-in things that smells like burnt plastic. Ellie didn't repeat the stories. She didn't gloat, but she heard them. They floated toward her like fog, silent, slow, and impossible to ignore. Her house, meanwhile, stood solid against the early winter frost. The new security bar still sat quietly beneath the front door. The walls hummed with the low, dependable rhythm of a working furnace. The floors, scrubbed with vinegar and lemon oil, smelled like memory and effort. Not wealth, not luxury, just home. One morning, Ellie came downstairs to find a plate of warm banana bread wrapped in foil waiting on her front step, tucked beneath a note that read, "Thank you for standing your ground. We've all been watching." Nayan and Ron. Next block over, another afternoon, a knock at the door revealed twin girls from down the street holding a box of cookies that looked more glue than sugar. One was grinning with missing teeth, Our mom said, "You're brave." Ellie accepted every gift with grace and placed each one on the small table in her sunroom, her new altar. She joked to Dot, not to herself, but to enoughness. Dot came by twice, that week, with news and gossip, and a ridiculous amount of enthusiasm. She was beaming when she walked through the door one afternoon, holding a pumpkin the size of a toddler and already cackling. "This," she said, "is your Thanksgiving centerpiece." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You know it's just the two of us, right?" "Oh, it won't be," Dot said, dropping her scarf by the radiator. "You think people won't say yes if you invite them? Please, you've become local folklore." Ellie laughed, and it felt real all the way through. So she cooked, not because she had to or to impress anyone, but because the idea of a warm kitchen, full voices, and clinking glasses made her feel something close to peaceful. She roasted a chicken instead of a turkey. Smaller, juicier, easier. Dot brought cranberry chutney in a chipped Pyrex dish that once belonged to her grandmother. Ellie baked stuffing with mushrooms and sage. Neighbors brought wine, rolls, and a sweet potato pie with a burnt edge no one acknowledged. They pulled together a folding table to fit everyone, covered it with mismatched cloth napkins and tiny ceramic pumpkins. The house buzzed with laughter, clumsy toasts, and seconds offered before anyone had even finished their firsts. Ellie looked around the table that night and felt a strange ache in her chest. Not grief, not nostalgia, something newer. She claimed, "This home had once been overrun by obligation and manipulation, crowded with people who mistook presents for love and inheritance for entitlement. Now it was full of people who'd chosen to be here. The dinner wasn't perfect. The apple cider got spilled. Dot accused someone of cheating at mashed potato portioning. The music from the Bluetooth speaker cut out halfway through. Ain't no mountain high enough, but no one left early. No one sighed with unspoken tension." When the doorbell rang late in the evening, conversation paused. Ellie glanced toward it but didn't rise. Dot stood and peeked through the curtain. "Delivery?" she called. Back, laughing. "Another pie. You're a magnet now." Everyone chuckled. The tension rolled away. Later, as the guests bundled into coats and hugged goodbye on the porch, Ellie lingered at the doorway. Snow was falling lightly. The porch light caught each flake like glitter. Dot slipped her arm around Ellie's shoulder. "Best Thanksgiving. Gift ever." Ellie leaned into her. "What?" Dot looked over the quiet yard, the glowing windows, the empty street. "Getting this house back, not just the title, the heartbeat." Ellie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Back inside, the house settled, around her with soft creaks and the smell of leftover sage. The door closed. The lock clicked. The lights dimmed. She was warm. And she was home. Snow was falling again, not in flurries or storms, just a soft sift from a gray sky that barely seemed to move. Ellie moved through her front yard slowly, her breath forming little clouds as she bent down to brush powdery white from the stone border of her garden beds. The perennials were long asleep beneath the soil, the ground hard and unyielding, but she checked on them anyway. Her hands in lined leather gloves brushed against the faded tags, coneflower, peony, balm, each one dormant but not forgotten. She knelt beside a patch of lavender and gently tucked a stray bit of burlap tighter around the base. There was something soothing about tending to what would bloom later, not because it needed her now, but because it would remember she'd come. Back inside, her boots left faint wet outlines on the tile. She slipped them off, placed them near the radiator, and padded into the kitchen. The coffee had already finished brewing. She poured a cup into the same mug she used every morning now, stone gray with a small chip on the rim. The brass keys sat beside it on the table, glinting in the soft light like punctuation marks at the end of a long, defiant sentence. Ellie didn't touch them. She just sat and sipped, her gaze drifting toward the window. The street outside was quiet. No tire tracks, no headlights, just a blanket of calm draped over the block. There was a knock at the door, 2 quick taps, and a third that sounded like someone trying not to drop a bag with one hand. She smiled before she even stood. Dot stood on the porch, cheeks pink from the cold, a paper bag tucked under one arm, and a knit hat tilted slightly sideways on her head, like it had given up trying to stay put. "You didn't think I'd let you finish all that chutney alone, did you?" she said, stepping inside. "What is that?" Ellie asked, already reaching for the bag. Cranberry walnut, still warm. "Don't act like you're not about to slice it in half before—" "I even take my coat off." They moved together like they'd done it for years. Ellie opened the drawer for a bread knife, and Dot folded the paper bag, placing it just so on the counter. There was no performance in it, just rhythm and ease. They carried their plates to the living room and settled near the window, the silence stretching like a cat across the carpet. Outside, snow thickened along the edges of the curb and fence posts. Dot took a bite and let out a theatrical sigh. "I don't even care if I get gluten sweats, it's worth it." Ellie smiled, her fingers curled around her mug. "You always say that." And I'm always right. They sat for a while like that, just watching the street, the soft snowfall, the way the world didn't seem to demand anything of them anymore. At one point, Dot glanced sideways. "You've been thinking about him?" Ellie didn't look away from the window. "Not really." Dot raised an eyebrow. "Not in the way I used to," Ellie clarified. "It's not grief anymore, it's just distance and relief." The wind pushed a small swirl of snow against the lamppost outside. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Dot said almost idly, "I keep thinking about that first night after you changed the locks. How he stood out there, fists all balled up, like the world owed him something." Ellie nodded. "He thought ownership meant love, and when he couldn't own me, he turned cruel. And now," Ellie sipped the last of her coffee, "now he's gone, and not just from this street." She set her mug down and looked around the room. The small lamps, the knitted throw Dot had left behind weeks ago, the tiny framed photo of a sleepy puppy named Ellie that still sat by the back door. The air inside the house felt soft, untouched, as if no one had ever tried to claim it. Dot leaned back in her chair and smiled. "You ever think about what you'll do next?" Ellie considered it for a moment, then shook her head. "This is next. This is enough." The sky darkened slightly as afternoon settled into early dusk. Outside, the snow kept falling. Ellie rose and walked to the front door. Not because someone knocked, not because anyone waited, just to do it. She touched the deadbolt. Once, then the new security bar. Her hand rested there a moment longer, palm pressed to the steel like a promise. She turned, meeting Dot's eyes across the room. There was no ceremony in her voice, just truth. "They locked me in on Thanksgiving," Ellie said quietly, "but I locked them out of my life forever."